Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. When everyone thought the Idaho Killer was a serial killer, I had a less sexy theory. I thought, well, could he be a hunter or a fisherman? Had he worked perhaps in a local butcher? It's just come out in the last few days that yes, he had worked as a meat wrapper and packer for BJ's Wholesale Club. Then, about 3 months ago, quite long after Koberger was identified, charged and detained, we found out, yes, he had worked for Charles Conklin, the owner of Big Brown Fish and Pay Lakes in Effort, Pennsylvania, and his job was filleting fish. Well, people didn't pay much attention to that either. There were some who suspected Koberger of being a serial killer, and then, or just the suspect before and after. And then there were also those who thought that he didn't work alone, that he was having help from someone. And then in the third thing, there was a suspicion that he had done something to a dog. Well, out of those three theories, how many do you think were accurate? And which creators were pushing those narratives? Do you remember? And I think it is quite good to do kind of a scorecard. How well did we do in analyzing this case? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'm going to be doing a live stream on the Corey Richens case around about 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that'll be tomorrow, that's Friday. And then on Saturday, I'm going to take you guys through TCRS in America, all the crime scenes and true crime, high-profile crime-related scenes that I visited during my recent trip through America. So if you're interested in that, obviously subscribe, but also look out for that. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Do you remember on my channel on March 3rd, I posted a video, Did Fish Filleting Imprint on Killer's Criminal Psychology? And that video barely scraped together 8,000 views, right? And you might say it wasn't really a very important video, wasn't it? I'll put a link to that in the description if you guys are interested in watching it. There was a lot of skepticism. One person said, doesn't everybody work with knives? Someone else said, what a stupid argument and excuse. People have been filleting fish since the beginning of time. Someone else said, well, that would mean any recreational butcher could find a desire to kill. Someone else said, I'm not sure what cleaning fish has to do with this whole case. Someone else said, it sounds like a bit of a stretch to me. And then someone else said, wow, really? I've caught fish and cleaned them, and I've never felt like killing anyone. Those who saw some significance in it linked the filleting of fish to the filleting of Buddy, a neighborhood dog, a 12-year-old Australian shepherd belonging to Pam and Jim Colber. And this poor animal was found on October 21st. In other words, there was an incident 3 short miles from 112 to King Road that occurred 3 short weeks, 23 days to be precise, before the murders. Was this related? And so someone said, I can't think about Buddy the dog. I can't help but think about filleting and Buddy the dog. Someone else said, it's the same thing, skinning and filleting. But the police didn't see a connection, and I didn't think there was one either. After all, if Koberger particularly hated dogs, why was Murphy spared? I mean, Murphy was apparently making a commotion per the affidavit. And he probably alerted survivors and Xana and Ethan that something unusual, some kind of altercation was taking place upstairs, and obviously there was one. Well, in the same way that Maddie and Kaylee were sequestered and effectively, they were on the top floor of the house, well, so was Murphy. And so the killer did have time, if he wanted to quote-unquote take care of Murphy. And yet the killer elected to allow Murphy to live, just as Chris Watts spared Dieter. Whatever happened in that house, an animal hair hitched a ride with Koberger, and if that animal hair proves to be a match to Murphy, well, that would be just as inculpatory as the DNA evidence, if not more so. one might be able to explain how his DNA got into the house, but it would be less easy to explain how a dog hair hitched a ride back with him if he didn't know or had never met the victims and had never been in their house either. And so presumably his alibi is going to make some provision for that. But the part I want to highlight in regards to the fish filleting isn't what I said or what the skeptics said, but Brian Koberger's own words. In a 2015 job application addressed to the Pleasant Valley School District in his hometown of Effort, Koberger provided the following valuable self-identifiers. He said that, quote, "I learned how to patrol and do basic security procedures from my year in law enforcement." He also wrote, quote, "I boxed after school every day at the Jesse Harris Boxing Gym on 209 next to Big Cheese Pizza when it was still open." He also said, quote, "I was a boxer and am still a runner. I lost 130 pounds at age 15 into age 16 while attending school. I believe this is proof that I have the required dedication to be successful. I also cut fish to the specifications of the customer while while working at Big Brown Fish and Pay Lakes in Effort, Pennsylvania." Now, when you read that, maybe you just see kind of a lot of information or a lot of basic backstory, but to the eyes of a seasoned analyst in this field of true crime, what you actually have are two paragraphs that provide essentially, well, certainly what I believe is a profile of the Idaho student killer. So let's have a look at some of them. Someone used to patrolling a neighborhood. Well, we know Koberger did, and that he was a natural at it. An athlete. Well, we're dealing here with someone who was running through 2 or 3 floors, taking on one target after another, and that would require fitness and speed. I think at one point I surmised that the suspect in this case might be a football player, but certainly a runner. Otherwise, then he also discloses that he's a boxer. And think about that. A boxer is someone willing and able to take on a target in hand-to-hand physical combat, which is to say directly, including a victim actively trying to defend themselves. Then we're also dealing here with someone familiar with cutting and gutting, which is to say someone who used a knife once upon a time would also likely be someone who owned a particular kind of knife at the time of the murders. The murder weapon in this case isn't the sort of knife any other student would carry. And then the next thing, someone was applying here for a position but struggling to keep it or not getting it at all. And this, I believe, is the larger reason why the crime was committed, because the perpetrator was isolated and an outcast, because the perpetrator saw the kids at 112 King Road as living the life that he wanted. They had good jobs, they had happening social lives, and they had a good thing going in class and outside of class, right? And he wasn't, as he saw it, allowed to have that sort of life that they were having. And so one wonders whether what sort of featured in his programming was, if he couldn't have it, if they weren't going to let him have it, well, he wasn't going to let them have it either. Do you know that Koberger lied on his application, claiming to have worked at Big Brown Fish and Pay Lakes for 7 months when he barely lasted 2 weeks? He was also a champion, according to himself, extemporaneous speaker. We get a sense of the speaker during the police stop, which is, so many also say they would do as well. Really? Would you have a 10, 15-minute conversation with a cop when you pulled over? Would a cop want to have such a long conversation with you? When Koberger was fired from his security post, one gets a similar sense of Koberger apparently knowing better and trying to talk himself out of it. Because he said apparently, quote, "I understand that if I do not resign, I have a right to a school board hearing to determine if I should be dismissed from the employment with the school district," end quote. Although there are rumors of a plea deal, and I think the above reinforces the sense that although Koberger probably doesn't want to be on camera, I think he does want his day in court, because he probably feels he can outsmart or outwit or out-argue the court system as well. This idea of himself as a speaker also speaks to the notion Koberger had of wanting to seem the most intelligent person in the room, whether in his class, to his peers, or in a didactic sort of situation, teaching somebody else, and especially to females. And with a female attorney, he has an opportunity to demonstrate that all over again. If Koberger did commit the crime on November 13th at 1122 King Road, what was he trying to say, to convey, to express by doing so? Symbolically, I think he may have been trying to demonstrate his dominance, not only over specific victims who'd made him feel inferior and perhaps emasculated, but also over the greater student community. Who needs to demonstrate dominance? Well, it's typically someone who feels bullied, and then the sort of circle is closed, and that person then kind of becomes a bully. And that's also part of his narrative. Of course, if no one found out he was the killer, that would be confirmation of his intellectual superiority, and perhaps he would take some satisfaction in that. Now that he has been allegedly found out, there's still a new game, and the new game is that they've got to prove it. And so the game still isn't over. He still has a chance to prove his intellectual superiority. And I think that is somewhat what this whole alibi, withholding, and all of that is all about. Does that make sense? So I'm not going to take it further than that. Just a reminder that I'll be doing a live on the facts, the case against Corey Richards. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.